In the depths of time, when the world was ruled not by technology but by instinct, human life was incredibly difficult. We are used to imagining it as a series of endless struggles for survival. But behind this picture lie details that few people think about. How did ancient people die, and what can their remains tell us? Modern archaeologists and anthropologists studying ancient burials sometimes come across finds that arouse not only scientific interest, but also strong emotions. Some of them are so unusual and mysterious that they baffle scientists, while others shock with their gruesome details. These are stories that are not written about in textbooks, but which could turn our understanding of the past upside down. Watch the video to the end to find out what shocking discoveries have made scientists shudder and what they say about the life and death of our distant ancestors. At one of the ancient sites dating back to the Paleolithic era, archaeologists discovered the remains of several people in extremely unusual positions. They were not lying in natural positions, as is usually the case, but were arranged as if their bodies had been deliberately folded or grouped together. The limbs were neatly bent, and the heads were turned to one side. This discovery immediately raised a lot of questions. Who could have arranged the bodies like this? And why? Perhaps it was some kind of ritual, but its nature remained completely unclear. Scientists suggest that it may have been related to some kind of cult or belief, but they still cannot come to a consensus. This discovery forced them to rethink many of their established views on primitive rituals. They studied the remains for a long time, trying to find any clues, but to no avail. The remains were so well preserved that even microscopic traces were visible on the bones, which could indicate how the bodies were arranged. But even this did not answer the main question. What happened to these people? They studied the structure of the bones, trying to determine if they had been subjected to any kind of impact. But no signs of violence or disease were found. This only added to the mystery. In addition to the unusual arrangement of the bodies, the archaeologists discovered another detail that baffled them. Next to the remains lay small, intricately carved bone figures resembling animals, but with strange, unnatural features. These figures seemed to be part of some kind of dark spectacle that had taken place here thousands of years ago. Perhaps they were part of a ritual or talismans, but their presence added even more mystery to the place. Scientists argued for a long time about the meaning of these objects. There were suggestions that they could be images of spirits or deities worshipped by ancient people. But what was their connection to the unusual burial? And why were they so carefully carved? Subsequent analysis and comparison with other sites from that era led to a new theory explaining this mystery. Scientists suggested that the bodies were placed in a position imitating sleep or meditation. Ancient people believed that after death, the soul did not leave the body immediately, but remained in it for a while to prepare for the transition to the afterlife. This pose was chosen to help the soul leave the body peacefully and serenely and not get lost on the way. The presence of amulets depicting animals with unnatural features indicates that these were not just toys, but totems which, according to ancient beliefs, were supposed to protect the soul on its journey. They probably symbolize guides to the other world or protectors from evil spirits that could prevent the soul from reaching its destination. Thus, this burial was not a grim event, but a carefully planned ritual intended to ensure the safe passage of the soul to the afterlife. Write in the comments, what do you think is the most terrifying reason that could have caused ancient people to bury the bodies of their loved ones in such a strange way? At one of the archaeological excavations, deep in an ancient cave, remains were found that at first glance resembled a dance. The bones of several people belonging to the same tribe were arranged in an unusual position, as if they were moving in some kind of rhythm. Their arms were stretched upward and their legs were bent. Scientists suggested that this could have been a ritual associated with some kind of holiday or event. They studied each bone for a long time, trying to reconstruct the scene. It seemed as if the people had frozen in the middle of some kind of action. Perhaps it was a ritual related to hunting or harvesting. However, when scientists began to study the surroundings, they discovered something that made them reconsider all their assumptions. There were no tools, jewelry, or other items that usually accompany burials near the remains. This suggested that the people were not buried in this place, but most likely met a sudden and terrifying death. Researchers began to put forward hypotheses. Perhaps it was some kind of ritual unknown to them that required this particular position to complete the journey of life. Or more likely, they were victims of an unknown natural phenomenon that caused them to freeze in such an unnatural position. With each new discovery, the mystery only deepened. Scientists continued to search for clues that could shed light on this mysterious story. They examined the composition of the soil and minerals around the bones, trying to find any clues, but it was all in vain. The remains, frozen in an eternal dance, continued to keep their secret. What if the last dance of our ancestors was not a celebration of life, but a harbinger of something terrible? What if they were not moving of their own free will? Let's try to answer these terrifying questions below. In one of the ancient tombs, archaeologists discovered remains that were not lying as usual, but were covered with patterns carved into the bones. These patterns were so complex and intricate that scientists were unable to understand their meaning for a long time. They suggested that it could have been some kind of ritual associated with the belief that decorating the body with patterns helped the soul pass into the next world. Further research shed light on this mysterious find. Scientists discovered that there were no signs of violence or disease on the human bones, which ruled out the possibility of mass death from starvation or epidemic. This suggested that their death was voluntary and ritualistic. Researchers suggested that this was a ritual associated with the transition to another world. Perhaps ancient people believed that when a person died, they became part of some kind of deity or spirit that could influence their lives. It was this ritual of voluntary departure from life that proved to be the key to solving the mystery. During the excavations, not only remains were found, but also small clay tablets inscribed with symbols, repeating the patterns on the bones. It took years to decipher these tablets, but in the end, it became clear that they contained a kind of guide for the soul. Ancient people believed that after death, the soul did not simply leave the body, but had to pass through a series of trials and mazes to reach the abode of the gods. The patterns on the bones were not just decorations, but a detailed map that showed the soul the right path. Each line and each curl had its own meaning. Some symbolized dangerous obstacles, others symbolized wise spirits ready to help. This discovery completely overturned the people's conception of the afterlife. The burial site turned out to be not just a place of rest, but a portal to another world. The ritual began during a person's lifetime, when they consciously prepared for the transition by allowing these symbolic marks to be applied to their skin and then to their bones. After death, the body was placed in a special position, not lying down but sitting or bent over, as if to continue the journey. Items symbolizing provisions and tools for this long journey were left next to it. It was not just a burial, but a final farewell and help to a loved one who had embarked on the most important journey. Additional finds in the tomb, such as small amulets in the form of birds and fish, reinforce this theory. Birds symbolize the freedom of the soul, and fish symbolize the ability to overcome any obstacles, even in the deepest and darkest waters. This was not just a belief, but a complex and well-thought-out system of understanding the world, where life and death were inextricably linked, and the end of one journey was only the beginning of another. The burial with patterns became evidence of the ancient people's deep faith and hope that death was not the end, but only the next chapter in the great history of the soul. At one of the ancient sites, the remains of a person buried in a fetal position were discovered. His knees were pressed tightly against his chest, and his hands were folded on his stomach. This position was very unusual for that time. Usually, people were buried in a stretched-out position. Scientists suggested that this could have been related to some kind of ritual symbolizing a return to the womb. This position was not accidental. It required considerable effort and possibly even special devices to prevent the body from changing position before complete decomposition. This suggests that this ritual was incredibly important to ancient people. Perhaps they believed that the human soul returned to the world from whence it came in order to be reborn. But why was this particular person buried in this position? And why were others buried differently? Scientists believe that this may have been related to the special status of the person or the circumstances of their death. Perhaps it was a ritual that was only used for certain people or in certain cases. This remains a mystery. Further research shed light on the true reason for this burial. Archaeologists discovered small, intricately carved bone figurines of newborn babies next to the remains. This led to the idea that the buried man was a shaman or healer who specialized in assisting with childbirth. The body's position in the fetal position was not just a symbol of returning to the womb, but a ritual act. It was believed that by passing away in this position, the shaman took with him all the illnesses and misfortunes associated with childbirth to clear the way for future generations. This pose was a way to lock in negative energy and prevent it from being passed on to the living. Thus, burial was not just a place of rest, but the last act of service to the community, which was supposed to ensure its healthy and numerous offspring. How would you like to die so that you would be remembered? Lying on your back with your arms outstretched? Or perhaps in a fetal position to make it interesting for everyone? We will tell you what ancient people thought about this later. At one of the archaeological excavations in the center of an ancient settlement, remains were found arranged in a circle. Several people belonging to the same tribe were neatly laid out in a circle, as if they were participating in some kind of ritual. Scientists studied this discovery for a long time, trying to understand its meaning. Perhaps it was some kind of ritual related to the sun or the moon. But why were they arranged in this way? As scientists delved deeper into the study of the remains, they began to notice some details that shed light on this mystery. First, all the people in the circle were about the same age, which indicated that they belonged to the same age group or social class. Second, there were no signs of violence or disease on their bones, which ruled out the possibility of mass death from starvation or epidemic. This suggested that their deaths were voluntary and ritualistic. Researchers suggested that this could have been a ritual associated with the transition to another world. Perhaps ancient people believed that by leaving this life in a circle, they were creating a kind of energy portal that helped their souls reach the afterlife. Or it may have been a way to honor those who were particularly important to the community. The remains arranged in a circle were a symbol of unity and strength. It was a message from ancient people who wanted to show that even in death, they remained together. This discovery forced scientists to rethink many long-held views on primitive rituals and beliefs. It showed that ancient people were not just simple survivors, but deeply spiritual beings who believed in life after death and in the power of community. At one of the ancient sites dating back to the Paleolithic era, the remains of several people were found buried in the ground. But their position was extremely unusual. They were not lying in natural positions, as is usually the case, but were arranged as if their bodies had been deliberately folded or grouped together. The limbs were neatly bent, and the heads were turned to one side. This discovery immediately raised a lot of questions. Who could have arranged the bodies like this, and why? Perhaps it was some kind of ritual, but its nature remained completely unclear. Scientists suggest that it may have been related to some kind of cult or belief, but they still cannot come to a consensus. This discovery forced them to rethink many established views on primitive rituals. However, further research led to even more unexpected results. Traces resembling rope or vine marks were found on some of the bones. This suggested that the bodies had been tied up after death, possibly to keep them in a certain position. Scientists suggested that this could be related to some kind of ritual symbolizing the transition from one world to another. Perhaps ancient people believed that by tying the bodies, they were helping the souls not to get lost on their way to the afterlife. This discovery has forced scientists to rethink many long-held views about primitive rituals and beliefs. It has shown that ancient people were not just simple survivors, but deeply spiritual beings who believed in life after death and in the power of community. Analysis of the position of the remains and the traces of binding allowed scientists to formulate a new theory. Ancient people believed that after death, the human soul must reunite with its community, even if its body had already left this world. For this reason, the bodies were specially grouped together and bound to symbolize their unity in the afterlife. The position of the bodies, with their limbs bent and their heads turned to one side, also had symbolic meaning. This pose resembled the position of a baby in the womb, which scientists believe was a symbol of rebirth. Ancient people believed that when a person dies, they do not disappear, but are reborn in a new form, and this pose was the key to a successful transition. Tying the bodies with ropes or vines was not only a practical way to fix the pose, but also a ritual act that was supposed to prevent the soul from escaping from the community and ensure its safe passage to the afterlife along with the rest. This burial reveals the depth of the collective consciousness of an ancient people, for whom individuality was inextricably linked to the unity of the tribe. We have examined the poses that have puzzled scientists, but there were also some truly horrific burial methods. What were they? Watch this video to the end to find out the answer to this intriguing question. At one of the archaeological excavations, deep in an ancient cave, remains were found that at first glance resembled a dance. The bones of several people belonging to the same tribe were arranged in an unusual position, as if they were moving in some kind of rhythm. Their arms were stretched upward and their legs were bent. Scientists suggested that this could have been a ritual associated with some kind of holiday or event. They studied each bone for a long time, trying to reconstruct what had happened. It seemed as if the people had frozen in the middle of some kind of action. Perhaps it was a ritual related to hunting or harvesting, but why did they freeze in such an unusual position? And why weren't their bodies arranged in the usual way? This remained a mystery. Further research shed light on this mysterious find. Scientists discovered drawings on the cave walls depicting people repeating the same poses as the remains. These were not just drawings, but a kind of message from ancient people. One of the drawings depicted people dancing around a large animal. This led scientists to believe that it was a ritual related to hunting. Perhaps the people believed that by dancing in this way, they could appease the spirits of the animal and ask them for help in hunting. But why did they freeze in this position? Scientists suggested that it could have been related to some kind of sudden event. Perhaps there was an earthquake or a cave-in that caught them by surprise. Or maybe it was some kind of ritual unknown to them that required people to remain in this position until their bodies became stiff. It remained a mystery. During further excavations, several more burials were discovered in the same unusual position. This suggested that this was not an isolated case, but part of some tradition or ritual. Scientists speculated that it could have been a ritual associated with the transition to another world. Perhaps the ancient people believed that by leaving this life in dance, they were helping their souls reach the afterlife. Or perhaps it was a way to honor those who were especially important to the community. The remains, arranged in a circle, were a symbol of unity and strength. It was a message from ancient people who wanted to show that even in death, they remained together. In one of the caves where ancient people lived, archaeologists discovered something incredible. Traces of stone imprints were found on the remains of one person. The bones were so tightly compressed that it looked as if they had been pressed. Scientists could not understand what could have caused this phenomenon for a long time. They suggested that it could have been some kind of natural disaster, such as a landslide, but there were no traces of a landslide or other natural disasters near the remains. This only added to the mystery. Perhaps it was some kind of unusual burial ritual. But why was the body compressed so tightly? And what kind of ritual could have led to such a result? Further research shed light on this mysterious find. Scientists discovered that the human body had been placed in a kind of stone cocoon. Small, specially treated stones had been carefully laid around the body, creating a dense shell. This shell was so strong that over time it compressed, leaving impressions on the bones. Researchers suggested that this could have been a ritual associated with a belief in resurrection. Perhaps ancient people believed that by placing the body in such a cocoon, they were helping the soul to be reborn in a new body. But why was this particular person buried in such an unusual cocoon? And why were others buried differently? Scientists believe that this may have been related to the special status of the person or the circumstances of their death. Perhaps it was a ritual that was only used for certain people or in certain cases. This remains a mystery. During further excavations, several more burials were discovered in the same place. This suggested that this was not an isolated case, but part of some tradition or ritual. Scientists have suggested that it may have been a ritual associated with the transition to another world. Perhaps ancient people believed that by leaving this life in such a position, they were helping their souls reach the afterlife. Or perhaps it was a way to honor those who were particularly important to the community. The ritual of burial in a stone cocoon may have been associated with the belief that the strength and spirit of the deceased must be preserved and passed on to the next generation. The tightly packed stones symbolized accumulated energy, which after death was not to be dispersed but concentrated to help future hunters. Thus, this burial was not just a way to say goodbye to the deceased, but a magical ritual designed to seal his power and preserve it for the tribe. In addition, scientists have discovered that the stones used to build the cocoon were brought from distant mountains. This fact suggests that the ritual was extremely important and that considerable effort was put into it. The choice of stones may have been due to their special properties or symbolic meaning. This once again confirms the hypothesis about the high status of the buried person and that his death was perceived by the community as an event requiring a special, carefully thought-out ritual. The burial became not only a monument, but also a sacred place where, as the ancient people believed, the power and wisdom of the great hunter was kept, which would protect their descendants. In one of the oldest burials dating back several millennia, archaeologists made an extremely unusual discovery: human remains with a large, skillfully carved stone ball in place of the skull. This ball was polished to a mirror finish, and strange symbols resembling stars and the moon were engraved on its surface. Scientists were puzzled. What could this mean? Why was a human head replaced with a stone ball? And what did these symbols represent? One theory suggests that it was a ritual related to a belief in celestial bodies. Perhaps ancient people believed that by replacing a person's head with a stone ball, they were helping the soul reach heaven and become part of the stars. Or perhaps it was a way to honor those who were particularly important to the community. Further research shed light on this mysterious find. Scientists discovered that there were no signs of violence or disease on the human bones, which ruled out the possibility of mass death from starvation or epidemic. This suggested that his death was voluntary and ritualistic. Researchers suggested that it was a ritual associated with the transition to another world. Perhaps ancient people believed that when a person died, they became part of nature and their soul passed into a new world. Archaeologists studied all the available facts, but none of them could provide a definitive answer. The remains were found in a position that suggested the person had not been buried. His body had been compressed with such force that his bones were broken. Scientists concluded that this was some kind of unusual event. Perhaps it was some kind of ritual unknown to them, which required this particular position to complete the journey of life. Or more likely, they were victims of an unknown natural phenomenon that caused them to freeze in such an unnatural position. Further research provided a deeper understanding of the reason for this unusual ritual. The burial belonged to an ancient people who worshipped the heavenly bodies. For them, the skull was not just a part of the body, but a vessel for the soul, which was supposed to return to the sky after death. For this reason, the skull of a man who was probably an important astrologer or priest was replaced with a symbol of the cosmos, a polished sphere imitating the celestial sphere. Engraved on its surface were maps of the starry sky, which served as a kind of navigator for the soul, showing it the way to the constellation of its birth. Remains were also found frozen in a position that suggested the person had not been buried. The body had been compressed with such force that the bones were broken. Scientists concluded that this was not an act of violence, but part of a complex ritual of heavenly ascension. In order for the soul to leave the body, it was deliberately compressed to release energy and directed upward toward the sky. The burial site was located on a hill with a view of the starry sky, further confirming the connection between the ritual and astronomical beliefs. In one of the ancient caves, archaeologists discovered remains that were not lying down as usual, but sitting up. The people were buried in an upright position, with their legs bent and their hands folded on their knees. This discovery immediately raised many questions. Who could have buried people like this? And why? Scientists suggested that it could have been some kind of ritual associated with the belief that death is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey. Further research shed light on this mysterious find. Scientists discovered that there were no signs of violence or disease on the human bones, which ruled out the possibility of mass death from starvation or epidemic. This suggested that their deaths were voluntary and ritualistic. Researchers speculated that it was a rite of passage to another world. Perhaps ancient people believed that by passing away in a sitting position, they were helping souls find their way to the afterlife. However, further research led to even more unexpected results. Small, intricately carved stone figures were found next to the remains. They depicted people sitting in the same position as the remains. This led scientists to believe that this was not just a ritual, but part of some kind of large religious cult. Perhaps ancient people believed that when a person passed away, they became part of some kind of deity or spirit that could influence their lives. Further research shed light on this mysterious find. Scientists discovered that there were no signs of violence or disease on the human bones, which ruled out the possibility of mass death from starvation or an epidemic. This suggested that their deaths were voluntary and ritualistic. Researchers speculated that it was a rite of passage to the afterlife. Perhaps ancient people believed that by passing away in a sitting position, they were helping souls find their way to the afterlife. We have learned that ancient burials can tell us much more than we thought. They not only show us how people died, but also give us an insight into their beliefs, rituals, and way of life. Each discovery is a new mystery that scientists are trying to solve. These are stories that make us think about how little we know about our past. Write in the comments which of these stories surprised you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new videos.